Hi, and welcome back for part 2 of our mini-series on starting an art journal. Today we're going to be talking about a way to decorate the cover and the pages in your art journal. And I have a few things here for this project today. So what we're going to be learning how to do today with all these different materials is we're going to learn how to make a stamp using foam. Now, this stamp method is actually a method of simple block printing. More complicated versions of this have you use tools that would cut into lino or stamp rubber or something like that, and then you can make a reusable stamp like you'd see at the craft store. What we're going to do instead, though, is we're going to be using foam for this. Now, you can use what I've provided in the kits for this project are pieces of foam core. Foam core is typically sold in a big sheet, and I went ahead and cut that down into some smaller squares. You could also use a foam plate, a foam tray. Basically, you just want a clean foam surface that doesn't have any dents in it yet. And then we're gonna go from there. So first things first, we have our piece of foam. We also have our sheet of tracing paper, and we also have, of course, a way to draw. So you might want to look up a picture or an image of the thing that you want to turn into your stamp. I think I'm going to do something like an eye or a cat or something fairly simple like that to show you today. I'm going to be using pencils because using the tracing paper, I'm going to transfer my design onto the foam after I take off this top layer of paper. Okay, so first things first, we're going to think about the kind of design that we want to do. Also, it's important to note that if you want to do anything with text, you're going to want to learn how to draw it backwards or flip it around somehow, because anything that you design on here is going to be printing backwards on your paper when you actually put your color medium on it. But so what I think I want to do is, first I'm going to make this paper sheet a little bit smaller. I'm going to tear this in half because I just grabbed kind of a full one, and that's a little more than I really need right now. And there we go. All right, awesome. So I think the design that I want to do on this piece, I'm going to do something kind of autumnal. We're heading into November here in the next week or so as I'm recording this. And maybe some leaves, maybe a tree. Maybe a tree would be good, actually. Yeah, I like the idea of that. I'm gonna do a tree. So I'm gonna make a note real quick of about how big my piece of foam core is as opposed to, or my area is as opposed to my sheet of tracing paper, just so I don't accidentally design something that's gonna be too big for this. I'm gonna grab my pencil, do a little line there. Doesn't have to be neat at all. Let's say I'm gonna do a little tree design like so. Maybe it's got some little pokey roots at the bottom. Just something pretty loose and rough. And then some like branch-like shapes. Give it a big fork. Some more branches. And yeah, and I'll put like maybe a little knot in the tree. So the next thing that I also want to think about is what part of this I want to have as my stamp. If I want to have the positive space getting stamped to be the tree shape, or have the tree be a negative space. Positive means, in this case, that there would be color there. So like over here, I'm gonna draw this rough little shape. It's like kind of a diamond. So these black lines and all this filling is considered positive space because there's something that exists there. All around it, this clear space is negative space. It's a super simplistic way of looking at it. You can also see it show up in computers or like binary ones and zeros. But basically, there's something here. There's not anything over here. If I touched my pencil to the mark, that would create a mark, and then there would be something. This is gonna be kind of complex for this, actually, but we're gonna try it anyway and see how it works. So here's why we're using tracing paper. We're gonna go ahead and obviously you can cut this with a pair of scissors. I was a silly person. I forgot to grab scissors from my toolbox. So instead I'm just gonna do a little fold and tear along that handy dandy line I made for myself earlier. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead now. We're gonna look at our piece of foam. Now, you might notice this foam has paper sandwiching both sides, like a weird Oreo cookie, and then there's a foam in the middle. We're gonna take this paper off. Now this can be kind of imprecise. If I'm lucky here, most of my paper will come off in one piece, and if I'm less lucky, I'll have to pull some extra paper off. But a lot of it came off in one piece, and that's always nice when that happens. Okay, so I ended up taking the foam off of this other side because it turned out that it came off a lot easier. We're gonna clear off our workspace real quick and make sure that we have not a bunch of like clutter and scraps on it, because then it's always easier to work when your workspace is clear. I say this, I think, every time. Have a dedicated workspace, have a place to do your thing, and try to at least have like one little clear area in it where you can see what on earth you're doing, because otherwise there's just gonna be clutter. So we've got our piece of foam and we've got our tracing paper, and we're gonna go ahead and invert that and put our tracing paper on top of the foam. And sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Kind of depends on the pencil you use. So we're gonna do that, and then also just in case, we're gonna do a little sketchy sketch along these lines and see if we can get any of these pencil marks to transfer onto the foam itself. So something you can do with tracing paper that's always really cool, and actually you can do this with a few different types of paper, but with tracing paper it works really, really well. You've probably seen people do rubbings with it, where you like put the tracing paper or other paper on top of something that's really textured, and then you take that pencil and you just kind of like do this over the whole thing. You can also do that to get a design on to something flat, or onto a surface rather, where you would just like draw in with the side of the pencil, just kind of like cover it in some graphite, and then you flip it over and then you draw on it, and then your design would like transfer through. But we're gonna see if, hey, look at that. It's pretty faint, but that's okay. I don't need anything super complex here. As long as I can see the general shape, I'm gonna be good to go. Okay, so now I need to decide how I'm going to print this and how I want this to be printing. First things first, I'm gonna go over this outline with my pencil, and I'm actually gonna press down into the foam a little bit here because I do wanna make a little, I do wanna start like kind of pressing down this foam. And this is kind of the nice part of using foam instead of using a traditional rubber, or like a piece of wood like you would do for block woodcut printing and other types of block printing. I can just use my pencil to make my lines instead of needing to use a sharp cutter of some sort. Those tools are very easy to find. They absolutely exist in the world, and they're really fun to mess around with. But they aren't as accessible because you do have to like go to an art supply or a craft supply store and find them. And also then you're working with something sharp, and some days I don't want to work with sharp things, and I just want to use something that's accessible and like easy to deal with. And if I ruin this one little piece of foam, it's not going to be me like going and getting this nice piece of rubber and then not liking the design I made in it, or otherwise breaking it or something like that. It's like a low barrier to entry, and that's always really important to me when it comes to like exploring new types of art. Okay, so we've got our rough outline. Now, one of the other tools I grabbed was a pair of old paintbrushes from our paintbrush supply here. Now I've got like these areas kind of in the middle of my shapes, and while I could use my pencil to like go in and press all those down. I found that it was actually easier to use the end of a paintbrush because it was a little bit wider of a surface. You could theoretically also use the eraser on your pencil, but then you're like running a risk of stabbing yourself gently into the palm with your pencil tip, and I'm not really here for that. So instead, I'm going to use a paintbrush. I'm going to use the end of a paintbrush, and I'm going to start pressing down in here, at least for those larger areas. For the smaller ones, a pencil is definitely more useful to get into these little corners, and make sure that I don't completely like make my design intelligible and hard to actually see what it is. I'm gonna try using this bigger one too for some of these areas and see if that helps me out at all. Well, you know, it's not as efficient actually. It's the smaller one. That's funny. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do after, once again, clearing my workspace just a little bit. All right, the next thing that we're gonna do now is we're gonna take our sheet of paper and put it down on our space. Now, a lot of stamps, of course, traditionally use stamping inks. They're a felt pad that's been saturated with ink that works well on papers and stuff like that. I also found that with these, weirdly enough, stamping inks didn't work super well with them. I made a very light print of my design, but what did work pretty well were different types of markers. And I only tried Sharpies in my initial like playing around with this, so I've got a few different things here. I have some classic Sharpies, some Rose Art and Crazy Art markers, some highlighters, also by Sharpie, and then some random pens that I had by Bic, B-I-C, looks like. So we're gonna try out a couple of these different markers and see how they work on our tree, or on our stamp rather.
So something else that is absolutely worth mentioning is that working with dark colored papers and printing surfaces is always going to be different from working with lighter colors. So if you're working on to black or dark brown or blue or anything like that, you're probably going to want to use paint rather than ink, and this can be like paint or paint pens or anything like that, but ink isn't going to show up.
Okay, now let's see how this prints. So we're gonna have to flip it over and carefully press it down. Make sure that you get all four corners. And across the middle, you want to get that ink to transfer from here onto your paper. And let's see how this one works. Okay, that worked pretty all right. So we can see kind of what didn't show up as well were, funnily enough, the Sharpies didn't show up super well here. The Rose Art was kind of 50-50. The Sharpie highlighters showed up really, really well. It might be because those were fresher too, and it was a few seconds between putting down this initial Sharpie ink and actually making this print. And then of course this marker worked pretty well, but those highlighters transferred really, really beautifully. That's good to know. Ooh, and this also has like a little bit of texture to it. Ooh, highlighter ink has some texture. That's cool. Okay, so as you can see, I went ahead and made a second design because sometimes you also want to have something a little smaller, something that's easier to stamp a bunch of times over an area. And so now I have my tree, and I also made an eye. I'll go ahead and turn these other way so you can actually see them, not upside down. And then I also have my covers here. Now you saw me make this in the last video. It's got this like pretty blue and black here, and I think that maybe I want to use, I'm gonna use like greens and purples or something similar like that in the colors to kind of complement this pretty kind of teal color back here. So I'm gonna start with the eyes, I think, and I'm gonna see if, can I open this flat? Will it let me do that? Yay, it will. So something else I found was these darker colors definitely transfer better than the lighter ones do. I'm sure that there's a reason for this. I think it probably has to do with the composition of the inks. in the different pens. So like the dark blue transferred really, really well. You can see, of course, like the purple and pink transferred really well. The purple was like okay over here, but definitely did better when it had this layer of pink over it, like my tree test did. I think what I'm gonna do then is I'm gonna take the purple and pink and make that my main colors for my tree. I'm gonna just see if I can ink this real quick. Now, something else that you could use for inking this would probably also be a thinned down craft paint or something like that. I want to say that that would work pretty well. Go ahead and just be kind of messy about it. Get some color down. And all those little branches, those little fiddly bits. I'm gonna take this. I'm gonna see if we can line it up so that the roots are kind of at the bottom. And press down. Use the side of our fist again. Kind of like smoosh it down in there and be kind of careful. You don't want to make it too messy. And let's see how that turned out. Yeah, that's pretty good actually. That transferred pretty well. So use a marker that has some fresher ink in it and will actually like show up with your colors. Let's see, and then I'm gonna do my little eye. I'm gonna see if this brighter blue works at all. Get another one in here. Yeah, I like how that purple transferred. I wonder if I could get a second ghost print. Yeah, kinda, you can kinda get a ghost print going on there. And of course with this too, like after you've done that, just to get some color on, you can always go in with adding some new color and trying out different pens and things like that. And then your test pages you can add into your journal as some of your first experiments with finding art.